Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the CDTRP webinar series. My name is Peter Urbanellis. I'm from the UHN in Toronto, working with Dr. Marcus Selzner. I am one of the co-leads for today's session. And a little bit about myself, we're working on the Theme 3 project, Engineering a Better Graft through the normothermic ex vivo kidney perfusion. May remember me from previous CST meetings. We're the pig people, always working with our animals to demonstrate that our way of storing organs is better for function after transplantation. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. It looks like it's going to be a very fascinating and interesting talk, one that we don't get nearly enough exposure to. And today's lecturer is Dr. Carolyn Tait. She is a member of the Métis Nation. She is from MacDowell, Saskatchewan, and is the research lead for the First Nations and Métis Organ Donation and Transplantation think tank that originated from a Royal University Hospital Foundation grant. The think tank is made up of elders, knowledge keepers, people with lived experiences, and healthcare professionals in Saskatchewan. She is the principal investigator for the Institute of Indigenous Peoples Health, CIHR-funded Saskatchewan Indigenous Mentorship Network, and currently serves on the board of Mental Health Research Canada, the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies, Elizabeth Fry Society of Saskatchewan, First Peoples Wellness Circle, and the Executive Advisory Committee for Cannabis and Mental Health of the MHCC. And so without any further ado, we'll introduce Dr. Tait, and we'll have a Q&A afterwards. So please feel free to write any questions on the side or in the Q&A box, and we will talk about them after her presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Peter. I hope everyone can hear me, and I'm very pleased to be here and want to thank the organizers for inviting me. And so I'm going to talk today about a think tank that we have funded through a small research grant from the Royal University Hospital here in Saskatoon. And you're probably wondering, after hearing my introduction, why is someone who's focused on mental health and other areas, why is she involved in organ donation and transplantation? And the reason is simple, is that I have a colleague, a very dear colleague, Dr. Michael Moser, who is a transplant surgeon. And Mike and I talked for years about trying to pull something together around First Nations and Métis peoples and organ donation. And we finally, a couple of years ago, sat down and said, okay, we're going to do this. And then we were very, very fortunate to have others join us. One particular, Dr. Adam McGuinness, who is a physician and Métis person who's working in the area of regenerative medicine, and Dr. Holly Mansell, as well as a number of students. So what I'm going to talk about today is how we formed the think tank, but also the reasons why we formed it and why it's important that as we proceed with new technologies and new ways of healing people and helping people, that we consider cross-culturally different cultures. And in this case, we're looking at First Nations and Métis people. So I'm a Métis person. I grew up in a Métis community. And so we have very particular cultural beliefs about different things, but within First Nations and Métis people, there's an enormous amount of variability, as we're finding within the province. And that variability in terms of cultural understandings generally relate to questions of personhood, spirituality, and the body. And this very much impacts the ways in which people think about organ donation and transplantation. We see that across generations that there is quite a bit of distinction between the older people and the younger generations. We also see that language plays a role as well. So one of the things that we're interested in is how people are making decisions around organ donation and transplantation. We're also interested in this being a complex health issue. So in Saskatchewan, we have a lot of people who in our communities that are living in poverty, and their health profiles are very complex. So we have comorbidities. You'll often see people with comorbidities such as diabetes, obesity. They may smoke, they may live in poor housing. And so they're very, very complex health profiles generally, especially when you're in that population of people who are living in the most impoverished circumstances. So we do have a very large and growing middle class of First Nations and Métis people in Saskatchewan. And so I think that the profiles are quite different actually between those who are impoverished and this growing middle class. But I'm not going to talk about that particularly. But when I talk about beliefs of personhood, spirituality, and the body, one of the things that we look at is what are the metaphors around organs and how do people think about organs? So for instance, in English, right, in the English language, in our mainstream culture, you can be heartless or you can be heartfelt, right? So the seat of emotions and characteristics of a person are attributed often to the heart, right? And so we have with the different organs, different variations in terms of the link between, for instance, the environment and we have the metaphor of the rainforest of being the lungs of our world, right? So the metaphors are there. So we don't know what they are in languages such as Cree, Dene, or Michif. And so we're interested in trying to understand that in relation to understanding the ways in which our people are thinking about organ donation and transplantation. So one of the common occurrence that happens is that people will say, when I've talked to them, our belief is that you need to be buried whole, meaning that you need your body intact. So the idea of donating an organ, such as a heart or liver or kidney, raises all kinds of concerns because it flies in the face of this traditional understanding of being buried or of being buried whole, right? So this idea of keeping the body intact. And that seems to relate to issues of spirituality, of people entering into the ancestral world and what happens after you die. So in our cultures, it's not uncommon for people to be in various spiritual and ceremonial settings of which ancestors are very present. So the ancestors are there, they're very real, they're very present. And these are very sacred times. And so what we're interested in finding out through language and talking to elders is what does it mean if you are buried without your organs? So what does that mean? We also are very interested in people's idea of personhood being attached to organs. So for instance, having someone else's heart inside of you. And what does that mean if you have someone else's heart versus having your own? And what would be the appropriate cultural ceremonies for different groups of people in order for that to happen so that people feel that the integrity of their personhood, the integrity of their spiritual beliefs are maintained. And so it's quite complex and it really varies from person to person in some cases, even within families. What also is interesting is that people are messy, and I'm an anthropologist, and it flies in the face often of the ways in which people think about research, and they want to have precise, measurements, and they want to have everything come out so that it's understandable and it looks consistent and that it meets this scientific rigor. Well, when you're an anthropologist and you're looking at different cultures and you're looking at the ways that people think about their lives and the way they think about their body and the way they think about spirituality and personhood, is that people are very messy. And so they have incompatible views that they don't feel they need to reconcile necessarily. And that's one of the wonderful things of humanity, is that we're able to live with competing views on different things, and that we don't feel all the time that we need to sort them out and have one particular view and that's it. So in this context, we're interested in how people feel. So people have talked about being buried whole, so having all of your organs, but they also talk about the value of gift giving and the idea that as a First Nations or Métis people, that we highly value gift giving above many, many other things. And if you look at Indigenous cultures that gift giving is a central piece of the social organization. It's the central piece of political organization and of family life. So similar to other cultures, gift giving is valuable within a First Nations and Métis context. There are various views about gift giving, and when people identify that you have something that they might want, then in certain cultures you just give it to them, regardless of what it is that you do that. And prestige and respect and many values are built into the culture in which a person who is giving is highly valued. So then when people talk about organ donation and transplantation, they also talk about gift giving, that this is something that if they can give a gift, and I've had many people say to me, I'm not using it anyway. I'm not using my organs. So yeah, I can give them away to somebody else. And so there is this idea that gift giving is highly valuable. So that's also important. And then there's the relationship to family and to kin, and that I had one elder who talked very extensively around the belief of being buried whole and having your body intact. And then he turned around and he said to me, but you know, Caroline, if this was my grandson, I would give him anything, including my organs. And so as I said, like people, I think with many other cultural groups around this issue, there's a lot of a lot of different varying ideas. Even within one person can have different views, and some of the reason why that exists is because people actually aren't thinking about this at all. So most of the people we talk to aren't thinking about organ donation and transplantation. Most of our Indigenous people haven't thought about signing a donor card. They haven't thought about, whether if a loved one was brain dead, whether they would agree to organ transplant. So this is something that we are very interested in, is what is the best approach in terms of talking to First Nations and Métis people about organ donation and transplantation. So within the Canadian context, you have what is called cultural safety now. So you have lots and lots of attention paid to cultural safety, which is a term that came out of Maori nurses. And many of you maybe have been, or some of you have been through cultural safety training, but it's really about having healthcare providers understand the historical context in which Indigenous people came to be in the situations that they're in. And that includes cultural oppression, racism, marginalization, many things that have happened, the loss of land, loss of language. And if you know anything about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and have paid attention to the TRC and looked at the calls to action, what you'll see in there is you'll see many references to the past oppression and the ways in which Indigenous people lost in many ways. So when we look at the ideas that people have about organ donation and transplantation, and this may come up as a surprise to you that people would actually feel this way, but I met with a number of Métis health directors in Saskatchewan, and the consistent thing that they said is our people are afraid that if they sign their donor cards, that if they're in a situation in hospital and that a healthcare professional may decide that they're dead before they're dead. They may decide that they need those organs for somebody else, and they generally mean somebody who's non-Indigenous. And so there's this fear. And so as much as to us on who are here today, that you may feel that this is an unwarranted fear, and why would they feel that way about the healthcare system, and don't they know that we have ethical and legal guidelines and laws that we need to follow, and legislation, that there's still that fear. And so that fear is something that we also want to address, and that we want to learn more about, and to see how people are thinking about that. What do they think happens? And so already we've come to understand that people really have very limited information on organ donation and transplantation. So it is a very complex issue that's compounded by things like geography, where people live, by language, by their beliefs about the healthcare system and not trusting the healthcare system. So there's a number of things. So that's why we created the think tank, and we created it because we wanted to try to understand better what people were thinking, but not to rush through this. So a lot of times for us as Indigenous people, there's a complex health issue and we're thrown into a hotel conference room for 2 days and we're asked to come up with solutions. We write on flip charts and frankly, I think we're tired of doing that. So what we decided to do instead was to create a think tank in which you have a group of people that are cultural experts that don't necessarily know much about organ donation and transplantation, and that these cultural experts would come together, and then we would bring the expertise from the biomedical, from the healthcare system to talk to us about the issue. So within our think tank, we formed in May 2019. We have First Nations and Métis elders, knowledge keepers, and persons with lived experience. And so what we have done is we've brought in different experts to talk about different subjects. So we've talked about the opt-out program, for instance, with the folks out east who are implementing it in Nova Scotia. We've talked with David Hartel from the Canadian Organ Donation, the CDRTP. And so we've talked to a number of different people, including surgeons, and we've done myth busting presentations, and so that now as we move forward, we have this group of people who have this collective intelligence that brings culture and the topic area, the complex, in this case, organ donation and transplantation. So there's a picture of all of us. I hope you can see it. A picture of our think tank, and they're a really good looking group of people and they're a beautiful group of people. They're just wonderful, wonderful people who work in all kinds of areas within Saskatoon and around Saskatoon. So, and we're under the guidance, the gentleman with the red on his jacket is our elder, Gilbert Kisep, who is a pipe carrier. And then the man with the blue shirt, not Dr. Moser, Mike Moser's on the end there, but the guy with the blue shirt and mustache, that is Ernie Sauvé, who's the chair of our think tank. And so we have 3 patient leaders, so 2 who are kidney recipients and 1 who is an anonymous donor, 8 First Nations and Métis elders and knowledge keepers, a transplant surgeon, which is Dr. Moser, nephrologist, which is, you would probably know her, Joanne Capel, Dr. Joanne Capel, 2 university research public health educator, 2, we like to have our students in the middle of everything, so we have 2 Indigenous graduate students, and we have an administrative lead and our university community support person. And we meet at a community spot called Station 20 West, which is in our inner city. And you can see up on the slide there what our meetings look like. And at this particular meeting, we had the Saskatchewan government, one of their members attending. And we meet from 10 o'clock in the morning till 2 in the afternoon. We compensate our think tank members very well so that people show up and are they're very highly invested now. And we have people Skype in or come in online to speak to us. And then we have conversations about what we should, what we can do. In the photograph is one of our donor recipients, Monica Goulet, who works for the city of Saskatoon, the police service. She's a very, very well-known person in our community and is a champion of organ donation. And she is now a year after receiving her kidney, and she's holding a fundraiser in March to raise money for the Kidney Foundation. So it's a 70s theme event called Staying Alive. And so she's doing that in March. And so in November 22nd, 2019, we held a pipe ceremony. So we had met from May until then. And at that time, it became a crossroads for us. And we decided that we wanted to expand. We have no money, but we're waiting for other research grants to come in. But we decided at that time that it was very important that we formally establish ourselves as a network rather than just a think tank, so that we could bring other people in. And we had made the wonderful connection with David Hartel, which was amazing. And David has been absolutely, and the folks with the network have been just incredible to us. And so we knew that we needed to have something more than a think tank. So we decided that we would establish the network. But in order to do that, from our point of view, we needed to engage our ancestors, and we needed to engage Creator in terms of how we move forward, and to give us strength, and to work towards what we want to work with. Now, as a group of scientists, you're probably saying, oh my God, Caroline, what are you talking about? And I'm talking about our cultural values and the ways in which we do things. And so I don't know if any of you have ever attended a pipe ceremony or had the opportunity to attend the ceremonial practices that we do. So in this case, this is a First Nations practice, and it's led by our pipe carrier. And in this case, the women, we are dressed, we have ribbon skirts that we wear, and we all sit together, and we go through a number of different things in terms of prayer and pulling Creator into the work that we're doing. And so this is standard practice across Indigenous communities, that there's different forms of ceremony and respect that you have to pay. And as an academic, you know, it creates a different context, and it really helps when you're working with community people, and when you're working in institutional contexts that are sometimes very difficult. And so we draw upon that strength. And what you find in our communities is and it's in mainstream community as well, right? But and a lot of you, I would imagine, are this way, that you have these highly dedicated people, and they're dedicated to the point where they work themselves to the bone. And so in order to kind of keep up the pace often that we're in, is that we do these collective practices together. And so in this way, we did this November 22nd. We're having another one on the 13th. We were just awarded, many of the people in this think tank are part of this, and we were just awarded the Provincial Indigenous Health Research Center, as well as the National Coordinating Center. So we're having a pipe ceremony in celebration and recognition of that gift that's been given to us. So if you look at this photograph, you'll see us now. We did the kidney walk, I think was back in May of 2019. And it's an unfortunate picture. So I'm the blondest Métis woman you will ever meet. And that's my dog, Rocky. So Rocky was with me, and I think he was squirming. So it's a terrible picture of me. But we have Monica Valerno Pelche. And the woman who has the sign that says, "I'm waiting for the gift of life," is Sandra Young Chief. And she received a kidney just before our pipe ceremony, and she is doing very well, and is one of our key people within our group. I'm just going to check my time here. Okay, and so we're also partnering with the Canadian Society of Transplantation and the Research Network for this event that we hope to hold September 22nd. It's a pre-summit to the Winnipeg Canadian Society of Transplantation Annual Summit. And so we're working on that. There's a committee that's been working together now for 2 or 3 months, and we meet regularly. And so anyone who's interested in coming to that, we're really keen to have Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people come together and to talk about this issue about the issue together and to learn more. We have 3 grants that we have put in that we're waiting for, and I'll talk a little bit about them. And then in the fall 2020, we'll submit a CIHR project grant. We're not entirely sure what the focus will be. We're hoping that this other work that we hope will be funded, that we'll get a better sense of what our focus should be. So the grant activities that we've applied for, so we continue to have the monthly meetings of the think tank. Those are really important, and and especially in terms of building that idea of collective intelligence around a complex health issue so that you can look at it from various vantage points. We will undertake a survey of First Nations and Métis people in Saskatchewan, an area, or Saskatoon, I'm sorry, Saskatoon, and the area around Saskatoon, probably 2 or 3 of the tribal councils on perceptions of organ donation and transplantation. So this is really preliminary data collection, and because we have limited resources, we're going to stick quite close to Saskatoon and the surrounding area. We'll do interviews with elders and knowledge keepers. So these will be open-ended, semi-structured interviews with elders and knowledge keepers on their perceptions of organ donation and transplantation. We plan to video the interviews. The interviews will be, so we'll have people from our think tank who are Indigenous, so speakers of Cree, Dene, Michif, so that they will, Soto, so that they will be interviewing the elders in their Indigenous language if that's what they prefer. We will then have the videos transcribed so that we have an English version of what was said, and then we'll analyze those interviews and consider them in relation to the survey data. We'll be interviewing persons with lived experience who are live kidney donors and their kidney recipients. This is a second project where we're looking at this question of should we be reaching out to our communities and encouraging people to be live kidney donors. And one of the things we want to know more is what is the experience of people who have volunteered in our communities to be live donors. You know, and so we have a series of questions of asking them, speaking with their donor recipients, and so we plan to focus on that, and then to decide what kind of a public education piece should we be looking at. And we'll be looking at literature reviews to see what's been done in other parts of the world around live donation and public education. Back to the interviews, sorry, I should have had this changed around, but the interviews with the elders and the knowledge keepers, those will be videotaped and transcribed. And then what we're going to do is something very Indigenous, which will probably surprise all of you, and to develop our public education strategy. Our goal at this particular time is not to necessarily increase donors, to have people sign their donor cards and to kind of work towards people becoming organ donors. That definitely is something that the think tank wants to work towards, but it's not our first step. So our first step is really this cultural step of trying to have a deeper understanding of the ways that people are thinking about this issue, so that when we move forward and we start to build a public education strategy, that we actually know what we're talking about. Because how we talk about organ donation and transplantation in mainstream society may be very, very different. There may be very different ideas and different ways of seeing from Cree perspective, Dene perspective, or Michif. And so we want to better understand that. So we're taking the interviews from the elders, which we know will be very, very rich in terms of cultural understandings, and also the interviews with persons with lived experience and their understanding of what it means to receive an organ from somebody. What does it mean to be an anonymous donor? What does it mean to be someone who donates to a family member? What does it mean to say, yes, you can procure the organs of my loved one here who's brain dead. So we're interested in capturing that experience, and then what we're doing is we're giving those that documentation, so the visual, the interviews, and the transcripts, we're giving it to an artist who lives in northern Saskatchewan. Her name is Donna Langhorne. You can Google her, either Facebook. She has a great Facebook page, so Donna Langhorne. She also goes by Donna the Strange. She's a woodlands artist, and what you're looking at right now is one of 7 paintings that were called the 7 Generations, and this painting is focused on missing and murdered Indigenous girls and women. And if you look at it, you can see the absolute beauty of the painting, but you can also see her message in terms of Indigenous women and the powerful, powerful message that this particular painting sends. And I had the pleasure of seeing all 7 of them in La Ronge, Saskatchewan a couple years ago. And I fell in love with her ability to articulate in very complex ways the issues at hand. So in this case, missing and murdered Indigenous women. And in this case, this one is focused on alcohol and colonization, and the ways in which alcohol was a tool of colonization, and the ways in which alcohol captured not only our families, but captured us individually, and captured our children, by our children going into child welfare. And so you see this very, very strong depiction of families and family disruption and that. So I encourage you, if you're interested at all in Indigenous art, to look Donna up. So Donna is going to take those interviews, and she's applied for a Canadian Arts Council grant, which we hope she gets, but we budgeted in money for her to paint 6 canvases for us. And so from the elder interviews, from the interviews of person who's lived experiences, that she will create, we have no idea what they're going to look like, but she's going to create 6 canvases for us, of which we will use these canvases to begin a conversation within our community. So we're hoping that we can take the canvases and that we can bring them to Winnipeg with us. We hope that we may have them by the time we're in Winnipeg, but also that we can take them into communities. And when we're talking about organ donation and transplantation, not come across with this heavy biomedical issue, but rather come across from a cultural point of view, and have the interviews with the elders. So we plan to edit them and to put them into forms of which people can listen to, and we'll be putting them up online, and we'll be showing them at different community events. And so this is our way of just gradually drawing attention to the issue, and to hear what people have to say. And so that's pretty much all I have to say today, I think, about where we're at. And I think I'm just about on time. So I'm happy to take any questions and critique or whatever you have for me. I'm ready.
All right.